How much can we change without changing anything? Same scene, same layout, 3 themes. Let's do it. Hello all and welcome to Biko Gaming. This is a brand new series called One Scene, 3 Themes. And for this first challenge, I'm going to start with a simple park entrance blueprint that you see me building here. No theme, no detail, just basic shapes, arches, buildings, and a small courtyard. The goal here isn't to change the structure in any way, it's to see how far we can push the same exact layout using only theming. So as we go, pay attention to how much the materials, the details, and even the purpose of each building changes the feel of the space. Because by the end, my hope is that these are going to feel like completely different parks. So each one's going to go in a slightly different direction, but they really all start with the same thing, the base materials. For the Wild West, that meant dialing in the color palette, pushing everything toward that faded Adobe, almost like Tombstone, Arizona style look. For the Pirate, it was all about swapping in rough weathered stone, something that already feels, worn down by time. And for Steampunk, I went with a mix of sort of like soot-covered brick paired with metal and industrial paneling. Now at this point, it's just really a foundation, but it does start to give a sense of direction. From there, each one starts to branch out though. So for the Wild West, I leaned into that Adobe Alamo-inspired style, adding some rough stone and some sun-faded textures to really ground it in the desert setting. For the Pirate, I actually started outside of the structure first. I brought in some water, the docks to really create the harbor feel that helps set the tone before even jumping into the buildings themselves. And then Steampunk was honestly the trickiest for me. The obvious elements there are pipes and steam, but before that, I needed a base that felt industrial. So getting the right mix of materials and colors was key, something that felt like it could support all that machinery that I plan to add on later. Then once those foundations are in place, roofs, rockwork, structural accents, each one started to feel like it had a direction. Phase 2 is where things really start to come to life, in my opinion. This is where the character starts to show and where each entrance begins to really feel like its own space. For me, this phase is all about breaking things up and adding variation. So for the Pirate build, that meant introducing damage, sections of wall that feel like they're falling apart or have been worn down over time. For the Wild West, it was more about architectural accents, so stone pillars, wood framing, this marketplace style roofing, elements that make it feel like an actual old frontier town. And then for Steampunk, this is where I started thinking about function. So I added in a transport element like a train or ride system, which completely changes how that side of the entrance works. And that's something I really started to realize during this phase. Once you give a space like a purpose, it naturally starts to shape how it looks. And for me, this is where it really gets fun because now it's not just about placing pieces, it's about building a world and the story behind the world. Alright, phase 3 is where everything starts to feel real. At this point, I've got a general idea of what each part of the entrance is supposed to be. Now it's just about making that obvious to the guests and to people looking at it. Because these can't just be buildings, they need to actually feel like they're doing something. Some of that is functional, like shops, restrooms, food spots, transport, and then some of it is just there to really sell the world. So lookouts, platforms, machinery, things that make the space feel alive. For the Wild West, that meant leaning into that desert setting again, so adding rockwork, breaking up the ground, and making the structures feel like they're really built into the environment. For the Pirate, it's more about layering in more of the harbor stuff, so cargo, lookout points, dock elements, things that make it feel like an active port. And then for Steampunk, this is where the mechanical side really starts to show. So adding those pipes, the gears, and more structured elements. And then even the greenery feels more controlled and intentional there. This is where the environment really comes into play. Each one gets its own version of nature. So desert rock and dry terrain for the Wild West, obviously, tropical plants and shoreline detail for Pirate, and then a more contained, almost designed greenery feel for Steampunk. And by this point, nothing should feel like a blank space anymore. Every section should feel like it has a purpose, even if you don't immediately know what it is. So once that's in place, now it's just about pushing the detail even further. So phase 4 is the final pass where everything really gets locked in for me. This is where I go through and tighten everything up, add in that final level of detail. So wall decals, damage, wear, grime, all the small details that break up flat surfaces, and then just filling in any empty space. So adding clutter, props, anything that makes the area feel complete. Also during phase 4, I cleaned up and finalized the pathing here, so making sure everything really flows the way a real entrance should. By this point in the build, it shouldn't just look themed, it needs to feel and be usable. The last chunks of creations in these 3 themes were a bit outside of the rules, admittedly. For the entire episode, I've really been working within the parameters that I set at the outset of the video, but for the final showcase of these, I didn't want it to be just a blank slate behind. I wanted to make sure it was set in a surrounding environment to sort of lock in the diorama feel, so that's where I went a bit outside of those borders. For the pirate version, I pulled in a shipwreck build that I actually built in a previous project just to anchor the whole scene and push the harbor setting even further. For Steampunk, I designed a train tunnel, so something that feels like it's leading out into a theoretical larger city beyond the entrance. For the Wild West, I built out a mine scene, so canyons, scaffolding, and tunnels to really extend that perceived frontier environment. And yeah, through all of this, the base never changed, same layout, same footprint, everything stayed inside the original boundaries outside of the ending set pieces that I just discussed. But yeah, all of this built on the exact same scene. And with that, here's how they turned out.